1. Josiah Cornwall woke up feeling like he had been kicked unconscious by clowns the previous night. His whole body hurt and tingled in a kind of funny way, all at the same time. He tried to lift his head, but had to laugh as it dropped back down on the pillow, feeling like it had a 10-pound dumbbell attached to it. Dumbbell, Josiah thought. That's the perfect word for me. How many of his friends had warned him how easy it was to go overboard on your last night? How many had told stories of hangovers and sore bodies? Pretty much exactly what Josiah was experiencing now, in fact. Some had even talked about how they really hadn't felt well enough to go to the house on the last day, their last birthdays as boys. But they had to. It was expected. It was required. He steeled himself and struggled to lift his head again, and this time actually made it. He smiled to himself at the memory of his friends dragging him from his house into the party. He hadn't really wanted to go. He really hadn't. He was, like most boys, nervous as hell about last day, and especially first night. I mean, just deciding what to do. It was overwhelming. But they had insisted, and he had gone, and he was glad that he had. There were boys and men there ranging from their late teens to their early 20s, and all of them were having a good time. It was Josiah's first time to be allowed to drink, and the whiskey, his father's favorite, so his by default, was like sweet fire going down his throat. It was just too good to stop at one. There were ribald jokes, the men laughing because they understood them, and the boys laughing to fit in with the men. They didn't understand the jokes, of course. They couldn't. Even Josiah couldn't. I mean, there were books and magazines and the internet, but nothing prepared you for the real thing. Or so Josiah imagined. No longer really a boy, and not yet a man, he was the focus of their attention, their curiosity. Oh, sure, some of the men there had gone through first night recently enough to remember it, probably in vivid detail. But they couldn't help but wonder what went through Josiah's mind, what he planned to do. And, of course, he couldn't tell. It was part of the ritual, like not saying your birthday candle wish out loud. If you said it out loud, it was spoiled. He stood, feeling his head wobble from side to side on his neck like that of a bobblehead. He had to laugh at the image of himself with a head as big as the rest of his body on a spring. Despite the pain like frozen shards of broken glass stabbing his brain in the backs of his eyeballs. He showered quickly, the hot water giving brief respite to racked muscles, and then dressed. He wouldn't have to work today, so he wore jeans and his favorite t-shirt instead of the overalls that he wore when working the fields. His mom, not unusually, had breakfast made when he came into the kitchen. What was unusual was the breakfast itself. Instead of the usual quick and easy, down and dirty biscuits and gravy or sausage and oatmeal, she had gone all out to prepare his favorite foods. Bacon, at least a pound of it, sunny-side-up eggs, hash brown patties, and there, in the wicker basket, under the napkin, he could tell by the smell, cinnamon rolls. Just the thought of one of his mother's freshly baked cinnamon rolls made his mouth water. But he knew, on the verge of manhood or not, if he reached for one before he ate the rest of his breakfast, he'd find his knuckles wrapped by his mom's wooden spoon. Hell, she'd do the same thing to Dad in the same circumstances. "Morning, Mom." "Oh, good, you're up." "Jonah, Josiah's up." Josiah's dad hated it when his mom yelled across the house like that, but it always worked. He heard his father mutter, "Ah, for God's sake, woman," then the creak of his chair as he stood to come into the kitchen. His mother, Dina, smiled up at him, reaching out her hand to stroke his stubbly cheek, and said, "Happy birthday, son." As she pulled his face down to kiss his cheek, he saw for the millionth time in his life the scar on her forearm, roughly panther-shaped, where her tattoo had been removed. As Josiah and Dina sat down, Jonas came smiling into the room. He transferred his cigarette from his left hand to his mouth and wrapped his arm around his son, saying, "Happy birthday, boy."